Started. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. All of us at E4FC are so excited to launch our entrepreneurship webinar series and introduce our new initiative, Immigrants Rising. My name is Ileana Perez and I will be your presenter today. Some brief background about myself. I'm a documented doctoral student in my final year at Claremont Graduate University, based out of Southern California. I worked 100% of the time as an independent contractor before I became a DACA recipient in 2013. And my parents have owned businesses for many years, and I continue to do plenty of independent contractor work on top of my full-time job using my Social Security number, which I'll talk about in the presentation. I originally joined E4FC in 2010 when I worked on E4FC's Life After College Guide for undocumented students. I rejoined E4FC in November of last year to work on new entrepreneurship material and launch Immigrants Rising, which I'll also talk more about throughout the presentation. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. You will all be muted throughout the presentation to ensure optimal audio quality. I invite you to ask questions throughout the presentation, but I will make sure to I will actually, before when I did this webinar, I was pausing to answer some of the questions, but this time around, I will be answering the questions at the end of the presentation. Please note that when you type a question, I can reply to the question on air for all to listen, or I can type a response to a person individually without disclosing the response to the entire group. This may be helpful for someone who may have more personal questions. If I'm unable to get to your question, or if you didn't get a chance to ask a question, you will get an opportunity to ask your questions in the webinar evaluation survey, which you will receive 1 hour after the webinar. I encourage you to complete the survey to ask questions, provide feedback to help us improve future webinars. Lastly, everyone who registered should have received a handout with useful links that will be discussed throughout the presentation. Anyone who did not receive the handout can email me, and I will make sure to get that handout out to you. Another thing, the webinar is currently being recorded, so we will be posting the recording on social media as well as our Immigrants Rising website. I will now turn off my camera and begin the presentation. Okay, so this is our first webinar in our Immigrants Rising webinar series titled Introduction to Working for Yourself. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering in our webinar series, so we plan to launch a new webinar every 2 weeks related to different topics. So later in the month, we're going to do taxes, ITINs, and EINs. And then during the month of April, we're going to be doing choosing a business structure, developing a business plan. And in May, we're going to be doing getting access to financial capital. These webinars are still tentative and they may change, and we may have some guest presenters or even some co-presenters that will discuss some of these topics. So this is our agenda for today's webinar. I'm going to be providing a general overview of Immigrants Rising. I'm going to be talking about the definition of independent contracting, some legal aspects about working for yourself, some basic guidelines of independent contracting, some differences between employees and independent contractors, forms required to work as an independent contractor. I'm going to be sharing some tips on how to start working as an independent contractor and how to talk to potential clients. Okay, so Immigrants Rising emerged in November shortly after the election when Kathy Jin reached out to me to see if I was interested in revamping some of the contents of the Life After College Guide, specifically the Earning a Living section. I said yes and immediately began working on content related to the IRS's ITIN. In early January, we released the E4FC's ITIN guide, which provides information, updates, and answers to frequently asked questions, particularly from DACA recipients who obtained an ITIN in the past and were wondering whether they might need to renew or obtain one in the future. The short answer is actually no, but you may read more about this in the guide found in E4FC's website. After the ITIN guide was released, I moved on to work on the entrepreneurship content. So, but instead of publishing a rather long guide, we decided to disseminate the information in shorter sections via webinars and a web page that will be released in late April or May. We are grateful for the valuable insight, research, feedback, and revisions from the National Immigration Law Center, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, E4FC Fuse grantees, E4FC I4IC members, and many other individuals who have contributed to the development of our materials. The initiative fully launched with the support from Kathy Jin, Dean Santos, and Maritza Quiroz, who have been working diligently on all aspects of the initiative, including creating partnerships, setting up meetings, graphic design, branding, coordination of the webinars, and much more behind the scenes. We have much planned ahead, so please make sure to connect with us via social media. And make sure to email me if you have more questions about Immigrants Rising, if you're interested in giving me some ideas about additional webinars you'd like to do, or if you'd like to also get an in-person presentation. So now we're going to move on to the basics about independent contracting. So the definition of an independent contractor is, so an independent contractor is a self-employed person who produces a specific type of work product in a determined amount of time. Basically, the personal information that is required is that the person or the company is not required to ask an independent contractor to fill out an I-9 or otherwise inquire about immigration status. So I'll definitely be focusing a lot on this particular aspect. So instead, a person working with an independent contractor would require a social security number or an ITIN to fill out the W-9 instead of the I-9 to commence the work. In terms of the liability, an independent contractor receives all the profits and is held liable for all losses and debts that are incurred. In terms of taxes, an independent contractor has to pay self-employment tax and income tax. An independent contractor may use an ITIN to file and pay for taxes instead of the social security number. So all of this is what I will be going over in more detail. Okay, so now moving on to legal considerations for independent contractor. So I know this slide may seem a little bit daunting, but it's very important to know that there are laws in place that state that it is illegal to knowingly hire unauthorized workers in the U.S. So IRCA requires employers to verify that every new employee is legally authorized to work in the U.S. through the I-9 system, which is what every employee needs to fill out. However, there is an exception which says that an individual or entity is not required to obtain Form I-9 from independent contractors. So as I shared before, independent contractors complete the W-9 form instead of the I-9 solely for the purposes of paying taxes. Even though entities or individuals are not obligated to verify the work authorization of individuals whom they engage as independent contractors, the federal statute listed here prohibits an entity from knowingly engaging an unauthorized individual to provide services as a contractor. This means that if an employer is aware that an employee's work authorization has expired, he or she could not then contract with that same individual as an independent contractor. Therefore, if a DACA beneficiary were to lose his or her work permit, the company that hired them would not be able to contract with him or her. So really the focus on this is the knowingly part. And the knowingly part refers to having a paper trail of some sort that shows evidence that the person lost work authorization. So in my example, if I could still pursue independent contractor if I lost my work authorization, if I lost DACA, I could do independent contractor work or start a business using my assigned social security number as long as I contract with any other entity other than the one that is aware of the expired work authorization. I know this can definitely lead to a lot of questions, so feel free to type some of those questions. So people such as doctors, lawyers, graphic designers, artists who follow any type of independent trade, business, or profession in which they offer their services to the public are generally not considered employees. The general rule for being an independent contractor is that the payer has the right to control only the result of the work and not what will be done and how it will be done. It's extremely important for you and your potential payer or client to understand the rules and differences between an independent contractor and an employee. Misclassification may result in legal consequences and penalty fees incurred by the payer or the client. To determine whether an individual is an employee or an independent contractor under the common law, the relationship of the worker and the business must be examined through the IRS common law rules, which are behavioral controls, financial control, and the type of relationship. So I'll go over these in a little bit more detail. So behavioral control includes facts that show whether the business has a right to direct and control how the independent contractor does the task for which the independent contractor was contracted to do. The key consideration is whether the business has retained the right to control the details of the independent contractor's performance or instead has given up that right. Financial control includes facts that show whether the business has a right to control the business aspects of the independent contractor. These include things such as how a worker is paid, whether expenses are reimbursed, who provides the tools, supplies, etc. The type of relationship includes facts that show the party type of relationships such as written contracts, financing of benefits, permanency of the relationship, etc. These common rules are discussed in much more detail in the IRS publication 15A 2016 edition. These guidelines are intended to protect workers from being exploited. Employers who hire employees must pay for some taxes, benefits, insurance, etc., whereas the independent contractor pays for these costs, saving the organization or company money. So now I'm going to go over the differences between an employee and an independent contractor using myself as an example. So I currently work at Pitzer College as an employee using my DACA work authorization and my social security number. But at the same time, I also do different types of contractor work in the educational field, in assessment and evaluation, and quantitative research methods. So as an employee at Pitzer, I have a continuing relationship with my employer. So I come in at 8, my work is 8 to 5. I have a designated set of tasks that I need to be working on. And then, whereas as an independent contractor, I do the same work for multiple clients. So I work with lots of different people, whether it's nonprofit organizations or individuals that contract with me to, say, for example, work on a survey, work on a analysis, things like that. So I can work with lots of different people at the same time as an independent contractor. As an employee, I have a desk, I have computers, everything that is provided by the university for me to do the work I do. Whereas an independent contractor, I have to use my own tools. I work with my own computer. I have my own software that I use, and I occasionally actually do pay some assistants to help me out with some of the work. At my job, it is at will, so I could quit at any time without incurring any liability. Whereas as an independent contractor, if somebody is doing this on a full-time basis, they receive all the profit and is held liable for all losses and debts. So as an employee, I have to comply with the instructions about when, where, and how I need to do the work here at Pitzer College. Whereas as an independent contractor, I set my own hours. I typically do my independent contractor work after my full-time employment. I work weekends. So for me, there's actually no such thing as an 8 to 5 job because I do a lot of work on the side. At Pitzer College, I'm trained by my employer to do the work in a specific way, whereas as an independent contractor, I get to decide how I want the work to be done. Of course, I set up meetings with my clients or with my payers to talk about what it is that they need. But in general, I do have the flexibility to complete the work. So I'm going to briefly go over some of the forms that are required to work as an independent contractor. I won't go into the ITIN or EIN, any of those in much detail, because I will discuss those in later webinars. But in general, the forms that are needed to work as an independent contractor are the W-7 form, but this is only if you do not have a Social Security number and are not eligible to get one. And this form is the form that is required to get an ITIN number. You need a W-9 form for tax purposes, and I will show screenshots of what these looks like so you can all get an idea of the type of information that they ask. You will also receive a 1099 form from all the different individuals that you contract with, and both of those forms are for the sole purpose of paying for your taxes. Lastly, I will talk about the importance of having a written and customized contract for each person that you contract with. So now I'm going to talk about the ITIN, which stands for the Individual Tax Identification Number. So the IRS issues the ITINs regardless of immigration status. And the only purpose of the ITIN is for federal tax reporting. Oftentimes what I like to say about the ITIN is that it's really intended to be for any foreigner who comes to this country to do business, and any foreigner can, and the U.S. actually encourages foreigners to come do business here. They get this ITIN number, which has the same number of digits as a Social Security number, and the only purpose for having that ITIN is just so that individuals that do come to do business in the U.S. Pay for the taxes, pay for taxes on any earned income generated from the business. So how to get one? You can get one either by mailing Form W-7 with the income tax return, or actually going in person to one of the IRS authorized certified acceptance agency. And in terms of the renewal, for the first time, the ITIN needs to be renewed. So as of January 1st, 2017. So all ITINs issued before 2013 will begin expiring this year. There is a process where it's based on certain number of digits will begin expiring, and those individuals will receive letters in the mail. So I know that some people were a little bit concerned about this renewal update, but it's really just intended for the IRS to keep track of who still has an ITIN number, because anybody who is eligible to get a Social Security number, specifically in the case of DACA individuals such as myself, we should actually no longer be using the ITIN at all. We should be sending a letter to the IRS notifying them that we now have a Social Security number. And all this is talked about in much more detail in the ITIN guide, which again can be found on E4FC's website. And you can see the link on the PowerPoint presentation as well. So this is what the W-7 form looks like. This is just the first part of it, but in general, it's going to ask just a lot of information about yourself. It will ask for some evidence of identification, and there are specific types of evidence that they accept, but nowhere on the application will it ask anything related to your immigration status. And again, this is important to know that the IRS is separate from DHS, again, all intended to promote business in the US and for individuals to come. So that's why there is no relationship between the IRS and immigration authorities. And things to look out for, you always want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date forms. And when you download the forms, you should also be on the lookout for instructions to the forms. Always make sure that both the forms and the instructions are up-to-date and are the latest ones. You can download all these forms for free on the IRS website, even just doing a quick Google search for W-7 form or for any of the forms I discussed, you will find it downloadable for free. So this is what the W-9 forms. This one is so this is the form that is given to every single client or payer that you work with. So for example, on a given year, I typically submit probably about 5 to 10 W-9s to every single person that I do any type of contractor work for. And as you can see in the form, this screenshot actually gives you all the information that you as an independent contractor need to fill out. So again, always make sure that you're working with the latest form. Right now, the latest one was revised December 2014. And on this form, you just have to fill out your name. You have to fill out the type of the appropriate box for federal tax classification. As an independent contractor, you would just fill out the first box. I will talk about the other business structures in a different webinar. You put in your address, and then very important in part 1, it actually says that you can put in your ITIN or your social security number. So this is where the W-9 greatly differs from the I-9, where it has nothing to do with your work authorization or your immigration status. Again, all it asks for is that ITIN number or your social security number or your employer identification number, which I'll talk about in a different webinar as well. And then this is a screenshot of the 1099 form. And this one, you do not fill out as an independent contractor. This is what you receive at the end of the year. And basically all this does is that the person you're working with tallies up how much money they paid you for the services. And at the end of the year, they send this back to you. So at the end of the year, you should collect as many 1099s as the W-9s that you received. So if I submit 5 W-9s, that I need to be getting 5 1099s, and these are the forms that I send to my tax preparer to help me do my taxes. And as an independent contractor, if you've never done taxes as an independent contractor, I highly encourage you to work with an expert, just because it can be a little bit complicated to gather all your forms and then fill out the right boxes when you are completing your taxes. So definitely encourage you to work with an expert on this. Okay, the next document I'm going to talk about is the written contract. So I encourage every single person to have a written contract for any type of independent contractor that you choose to do. So basically what this does is defines the terms of engagement, so both sides are clear about the nature of the work and the party's expectations. It provides evidence of an intended arrangement that he or she intends to work as an independent contractor and not as an employee. This is very important because, again, the IRS is on the lookout for individuals who are contracting with individuals when they should actually be employing them. So that's why this serves as evidence of the arrangement that it is, in fact, independent contractor work and not employee work. So this also allows parties to think through key aspects of the working relationship. So it may outline, a timeline of when the work needs to be completed. It could include whether or not there would be in-person meetings or how often in the working relationship you want to meet and discuss how the project is going. All of that would be included in the contract. This also enables the parties to include additional provisions that are important to them, such as require the contractor to protect and preserve confidential and proprietary information, requiring assignments of inventions, and refraining from unfair competition. So on here, depending on the type of work you do, you can actually sort of keep different types of work separate depending on who you're contracting with. So all of that information can be outlined in the written contract. There are a lot of forms out there that templates that you can use for a written contract, so you don't necessarily have to come up with an entire thing on your own. I believe the handout has some links to where you can go take a look at what a written contract looks like, and you can also take a look at some of the templates that are ready to use. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some tips to start earning a living as an independent contractor. So I'm just going to go over a few of these, but in general, make sure the type of work you wish to do follows the independent contractor guidelines. This one I can't state enough, because oftentimes, individuals who you want to work with may not necessarily know the guidelines themselves. So you really need to be ready to explain those guidelines to the person you're contracting with. Become familiar with the legal aspects of working as an independent contractor. Very, very important, especially for DACA recipients or for individuals who may not have work authorization. Really need to know the legal aspects I discussed earlier. You can highlight your assets and skills and be prepared to demonstrate how they meet the needs of your clients. So there are many different examples of how of the type of work that you can do as an independent contractor, and a lot of it is really based on your own skills and what it is that you've acquired or that you're naturally good at doing and that you enjoy doing. Any of that can turn into independent contractor work. Also, research similar types of work you do and know the standard rate for your services. So I'm sure that anything you think of related to independent contractor work, somebody has already done. So I encourage you to Google some of this information and be prepared to know what is the standard hourly rate, or just in general the rate for the type of services that you're wanting to provide. Become familiar with written contracts and make sure to sign a contract with every client. This is very important. In addition to everything I talked about related to the writing to the written contracts, it's also a legal binding document. So in the event that somebody doesn't want to pay you for your services, you can use this document to take them to small claims court to get paid for the services. So this definitely protects you as well. You can promote yourself and your services via social media. Very popular nowadays to use LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Maybe you want to start a blog, you want to start a website talking about the different types of services that you provide. You can also join an independent consultant network such as IQ Workforce. And what's really great about this is that you can by joining this network, you can get an idea of the individuals looking for specific services, so you can kind of see what's needed and where you might be able to take advantage to work. I encourage you to also become active in your local business community. Really just connecting with different individuals. Really, it's at the end of the day, any type of independent contractor work is really based on relationships that you make with people and understanding the needs of the different people that you meet. I encourage you to attend workshops and watch webinars, lecture presentations. I mean, there are so many available for free on YouTube, and anything you can think of related to consulting, independent contractor, any specific type of consulting or independent contracting, I'm sure you will find online. Another thing you can do is research additional tips and resources online. Again, with Google, you can pretty much Google any type of independent contractor work, and I'm sure there will be lots of great information. And lastly, network. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is for an independent contractor or a consultant to meet different individuals and really try to network, whether it's at professional conferences, whether it's at community events, anything like that, and talk to people, get their business cards. So now I'm going to talk about how to talk to potential clients. So some of the tips before were just kind of, giving you a feel for what it would look like to even start working as an independent contractor. But when you actually are able to get some of those business cards, then these are some tips to help you figure out what to do next. So once you do get the contact information for somebody, set up a time to meet with them. You can offer a specific time window and your availability. I encourage you to offer to pay for lunch or coffee, tea, depending on your budget. And be prepared to talk to clients about the legal aspects of working as an independent contractor. Like I mentioned before, in some instances, the client may not be aware of the legal aspects, so that's when you want to make sure you're prepared. And a lot of this information regarding the legal aspects will be available in the handouts. There's a lot of information citing all the federal clauses and everything that's needed to know about the legal side of things. It is in the handouts, and it will also be provided on Immigrants Rising website, which again will launch in about a month. And the recording of this webinar will also be up there, so we'll make sure to have a lot of resources for you to share these with potential clients. Be prepared to talk about your previous work or education experience and how it aligns with the proposed scope of work. So oftentimes I get a lot of maybe college students that are interested in doing something like this, and they may not have a lot of work experience yet. So you can talk about maybe some projects that you've done related to the specific type of work in class. Be prepared to talk about how your services can meet the needs of your clients. So in this instance, you may have to do some research. So depending on the type of work you want to do, you may want to do a little bit of stalking on their site to figure out, where you can chime in and talk about, maybe there's something that you notice on their website that needs some changes or anything like that. That's where you really want to make sure that that the client that you're working with. Talk about how your services stand out from the crowd. So showcase some of the examples of your best work, whether it's classwork, whether it's other independent contractor work, or even other employment. You definitely want to make sure that you talk about that. You may want to start creating a portfolio, and again, all this depends on the different type of independent contractor that you want to do. You can also create a web page for yourself where you can, that could be a link that you include in a business card, and then folks can go there to see to see your work. And also be prepared to talk about your competitive rates. Again, very important to research rates for similar types of work. Everything is available on the internet. And a lot of the independent contractor work really requires you to just ask a lot of questions and listen. So some of the questions that you may want to ask are, so what is your biggest and most immediate need? What has your experience been in the past working with, different types of consulting? What has worked? What hasn't worked working with independent contractors? What are your expectations of me and the work product? So time commitment, check-ins, in-person meetings. So you really want to get an idea of what that person is looking for. That client may require a lot of in-person interaction, or that client may not want that personal interaction. Definitely important to talk about timelines as well to make sure that the work gets delivered on time. Other questions that are very important are to talk about the budget. What kind of budget does that person have? Then does that fit within your asking rate and what you need? And then also, what are the next steps? Never walk away from a meeting without knowing what is happening next. So here are some examples of independent contractor work. And really what this slide is intended to do is to give you an idea that there are many, many different types of independent contractor work that you can do. Anything from, an accountant, doctor, lawyer, to becoming a tutor or a lifeguard. And I know that with some of these, they do require higher education or perhaps some licensing. And I will talk a little bit about some of the licensing that is required for having your own business or working from home in a different webinar. But pretty much that anything that you could think of, or anything that you enjoy doing, skills that you have acquired, whether it's at work, whether it's at school, are something that you can do consulting or independent contractor work. And with this, I end this webinar. So again, this was a very general overview of working for yourself, and more detailed information will be released once we complete our webpage. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions, or if you're interested in having me do webinars or presentations at your organization, group, or school. And then I'm going to remind you to complete the evaluation survey. And if you can include the times and days that work best for you. We really want to make sure that, as many people can get access to this information. And again, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available via social media for now. And it will also be available on our website, as well as the entire PowerPoint presentation, handouts, and much more. So now, with the remaining time, I'm going to do a quick time check with plenty of time. I will go through some of your comments and questions. And I also have additional comments and questions from a previous, from another webinar that I did last week. So I can also include those in here and talk about those a little bit. So let me check to see. Okay. Is it recommended to use your DACA social security number to work as an independent contractor? That's a great question. And I did talk about this, but so once you have a social security number, whether it's through DACA or any other way, you should only be using your social security number from now on to do whether it's employee work, if you have work authorization, or to do independent contractor work. There is nothing that says that you can't do both. You can definitely do both employee and independent contractor work. An employee only if you have work authorization, and independent contractor work, it is not needed. But anybody who has a social security number now and had an ITIN in the past should not go back to using that ITIN. Somebody said that they missed some of the legal aspects. So again, this webinar is being recorded. So the recording will be available on social media. And I will also email everybody who registered for the webinar. I will email the handouts as well as the recording for people to follow. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually pull up some of the questions that came up before, just so folks can get an idea of what else was asked in the last webinar session I did. So give me a second to pull those up. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. So a very good question that somebody asked was, if I work for a nonprofit and my work permit expires, can I just apply to work for a different nonprofit with my ITIN? And yes, you can contract with another nonprofit organization using, if you had a social security number, if you have a social security number, you should continue to use your social security number as an independent contractor as an independent contractor. But you cannot contract with the organization that knows that your work permit expired. Okay, let me go back to the questions here with the audience. What happens if your DACA is not renewed or if DACA gets repelled? Can I still use your social security number? Yes, that is a very good question. And yes, your social security number will not disappear. That is a number that you keep. And I know that I have DACA myself, so I do know that the social security card says not valid without work authorization. So again, these options that I will talk about, independent contractor work, and then when I move on to talking about business structures, have nothing to do with getting work authorization. This is general information that is available to any foreigner who comes to do business into the US. But you should be only using your social security number as an independent contractor or as an entrepreneur if you have one. If you don't have one, then that's again when you would apply for an ITIN number, but only if you are not eligible to get the social security number. What if your DACA has already expired? Can I still use my social security number? Yes, you can continue to use your social security number. Oh, name a specific company you work with as an individual contractor and what you do, please. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit. So as an employee, I work as a research analyst in institutional research and assessment at Pitzer College. But as a contractor, I've contracted with nonprofit organizations. I previously did work with Families in Schools, which is a nonprofit organization here in LA that needed to evaluate their programming. So what we did was, and I say we because I worked with my advisor, but what we did is we created a pre and post survey design and then analyzed the data on that. So that's all my independent contractor work. I currently have another contract with some professors here at the college who created a survey for a particular program that they're running, and they contracted me to do the data analysis for the particular project. So they shared all their data with me, and I'm in charge of running all their statistical analyses based on the data that they did. And again, my examples lean toward education. That is my field, and quantitative research methods. But we are looking to get some other presenters to also share what they do as entrepreneurs or as independent contractors. I also have some colleagues who do more qualitative work, qualitative research. So some of the things that you can do is, as an independent contractor, a lot of individuals can transcribe interviews. So especially in research, anybody who does qualitative work will often interview individuals, and it's very time consuming to transcribe those interviews. So that is a very popular type of independent contractor work, to just transcribe interviews for researchers. Very popular to do that. But again, we're hoping to invite other individuals to talk about, what they do as independent contractors. And before I continued with grad school, when I was just getting out of college, some of my independent contractor work was in promotions and marketing. So at some point, a few years back, I started a social media consulting business. So this was when Facebook was just starting to launch all the social media, and a lot of small businesses were looking to get connected on social media. So they would contract me to basically just promote their businesses on social media. That's still actually very popular to this day. A lot of folks want to jump on board, and maybe not just necessarily with social media and promoting their businesses, but getting into like the ads, the Facebook ads, or some of the other features where you can target specific individuals to sell your product. So that's something that could be done as independent contractor. Again, a lot of the multimedia features that you now see is very popular for independent contractors to work on videos, to work on just any type of multimedia for small businesses, or even large businesses too. I mean, every organization, Facebook, Apple, they contract with independent contractors to do lots of different type of work. So I'll go back to answering a few other questions from the last webinar. Let me see. So somebody said they worked for a nonprofit, and they were wondering about the ability to continue to work with the nonprofit even after DACA expires. And again, it's really important to understand this, that if somebody loses that work authorization, so in the case that DACA were to get rescinded, that's when you cannot longer work for that organization or for that company, because they would have a paper trail indicating that you lost your work authorization. So anytime that somebody knows that you no longer have work authorization, then that's when you cannot do either independent contractor work or obviously work as an employee anymore. But there is nothing holding you back from doing independent contractor work at any other nonprofit organization, company, really anybody. Somebody asked, the ITIN says that it is for federal tax purposes. Can you also use it to file state taxes? Yes, anybody who has the ITIN can use it to file both federal and state taxes. Let me read some other one. Somebody asked, does working as an independent contractor automatically mean that you are working as a sole proprietor? No, they are different. So as an independent contractor, as a consultant, the next step would be to move into a sole proprietor, which means that you own your own business. So I will talk about what that means in the next webinar. So there are different types of business structures, from sole proprietorship to partnerships to limited liability corporations, worker cooperatives. So that will be a completely different webinar. But all of those opportunities are available to all immigrants, regardless of legal status, using an ITIN or a Social Security number. Can you go from independent contractor work to working as an employee? So yes, individuals who initially start as an independent contractor can definitely get hired by the company. So a perfect example is perhaps a photographer, videographer that initially gets contracted to do some work for a company, and then the company likes them so much that they actually want to hire them either part-time, full-time. This is only a possibility if that person has work authorization, of course. If not, then that person can continue to work as an independent contractor. Another question was the other way around. So if you are an employee and an independent contractor, again, you can do both at the same time, or you can switch. It's not recommended to switch from an employee to an independent contractor unless it meets the guidelines, unless you definitely go from doing your work as an employee and then for whatever reason, your activities or your work now switches to independent contractor work. Then as long as it meets the guidelines, you can definitely move into independent contractor work. But again, it doesn't mean that you have to work with one particular organization, client, payer. You can work with multiple individuals as an independent contractor. So here's another question. If you're looking for a job, you apply to positions. How would one go about looking for clients while starting as an independent contractor? How do you approach a potential client for the first time? This is a very good question because that is correct. I think that independent contracting, or in general entrepreneurship opportunities, they are different because you are not looking for specific type of positions. In this case, you're actually marketing yourself and looking to sell whatever type of services you're doing with lots of different individuals. So in this case, depending on the example, so in my example, I never really have to look for clients. It's mostly been just word of mouth that after I did contract work with families and schools, then they can easily, share a list of other organizations that need evaluation. Pretty much every single organization needs to evaluate their programming at some point or another. So that's, I can reach out to any organization, and then if they're related, in this case to families and schools, then they can also talk to families and schools about the type of work I did for them, and that's how the word would get around about the type of work that I do. So I would not be looking for those positions. Like I said before, like I mentioned, the network IQ Workforce, on there you can create your profile, and then that's a good way for to meet individuals looking for specific type of services. How do you approach a potential client for the first time? So again, I provided a few tips, but I think this is a very good question because, again, it is very much a switch in mindset where you're not getting hired. You're not going to do an interview as you would if you're getting hired. It is an interview to the extent where, both of you will be asking questions about the type of services they need and what you could provide. But it's really more, I think entrepreneurship opportunities in general require a lot of relationship building, of really trying to understand what it is that they need from you and what it is that you can provide for that person. And also it requires you to really master a particular skill so you can talk effectively about what it is that you do and convince individuals that, they should contract with you to do the type of work that, that needs to be done. So again, very much a switch in mindset where you're not interviewing for a particular position. You're really more trying to, sell your services to lots of different people, to your clients. Let me see if any other questions are here. What type of consultant work is more profitable, successful, or professionally advantageous? I think that really depends. Again, I started off with introduction to working for yourself, but this can launch into large businesses. Anything from, a legal consultant can, eventually turn into owning your own law firm. Same thing with, a doctor could do contractor work and then eventually own their own practice. So pretty much anything you can think of that you can do as an independent contractor, you can grow in as much as you would like. I think a lot of folks that do choose to do consulting oftentimes do it on the side maybe of their job, and then for whatever reason end up really putting the time and effort into establishing that into a much larger business venture. So for example, with the kind of work that I do at one point in the future, once I finish my PhD, would love to launch my own research and evaluation firm. And in terms of how profitable any of these ventures can be, it really is up to you. As an independent contractor, you can work as many hours as you want. There is no limit. So when I was working as an independent contractor 100% of the time when I got out of college, I was working, like up to, pretty much the entire day from like 8 in the morning all the way until 10, 11 p.m. And even to this day, I still work very long hours, but it's because I know that the time I invest in the type of work I do is how much I'm going to get back as income. And of course, there are different fields depending on the education, depending on the type of skills that you have will obviously pay more. Legal services, medical services, they require a lot of education. So you can grow into that. But any other business can grow into something much bigger, but it's all up to you to invest the time and effort into growing that. But that's a great question. Thank you. So since we have a few more minutes left, I'll keep going through the other list, but definitely feel free to ask any other clarifying questions or anything else that comes to mind. We can talk about it here. Let me see. How different is it going from an employee to a contractor? So it is very different to go from an employee to a contractor. Again, as an employee, pretty much you follow a certain set of guidelines that your employer puts on you. There's a certain time that you have to follow. Whereas as an independent contractor, you create your own schedule. You do the work however you see fit. You work with many different clients. If you're doing it 100% of the time, then you definitely have to be working with, more than one client, unless you find one client that just pays you, enough for you to make a living. But they are definitely very different. And then somebody asked, if my DACA expires, but I receive my green card, can I go back to working for the same company? Yes. So anytime you have a valid work authorization, whether it's through DACA or any other type of immigration reform or policy that does change your status and allows you to legally work, then of course, then you can definitely move forward with the I-9 form and everything else that is needed to work legally in the country. And anybody, again, regardless of legal status, can get the ITIN and can pursue any type of entrepreneurship opportunity. Okay, well, those were some of the main questions from last time that I wanted to go over. Again, want to remind you that this is a webinar series, so I will continue to discuss many other aspects of entrepreneurship, anything from building capital to start your business, giving you an example of giving you more examples of what people do as independent contractors, what people have done to grow their businesses as entrepreneurs. So I definitely invite you to follow us on social media, follow me, follow E4FC to get the latest information on entrepreneurship. And also E4FC, of course, produces many other wonderful resources for educators, for parents, for students. They're always coming out with the latest information regarding current immigration issues. So definitely encourage you to check out their website. And with that, I am going to end the webinar if there are no other questions. Well, let's see, we have a few others. Can you please tell us your experience with your very first job as an independent contractor? So I started off actually back in college as a tutor. So I did a lot of tutoring in math. I majored in math. So I was able to do that. And again, this was before I had DACA. So I did independent contractor. I did tutoring. I also did promotions. So every large company needs to like do promotions or marketing in one way or another. So they have like these trade shows and, you know, events that they do. So I would do, you know, that is a very popular way to do independent contractor work, through promotions for different companies. And then from then on, once I got into graduate school and developed some of these additional skills with using statistical software, then that's when I transitioned into doing more of the evaluation and research side of things. Great. I'm glad you found this information helpful. Again, I encourage you to stay tuned for lots of great new information that I will continue to share with you about entrepreneurship. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.